Hannah's body is found deep in a ravine, beside her shattered camera tripod. Evan Cross swears her death was an accident. But the evidence tells a darker story. 2 sets of footprints hint at a shadowy third presence in the forest. And the tree still whispers secrets no one is ready to hear. The last week of August 2012 had been unusually warm in the Pacific Northwest. The kind of summer that tricks you into forgetting the rain will return. Hannah Brooks sat at the small kitchen table of her apartment, staring at an untouched mug of coffee. Outside, the hum of traffic mixed with the chatter of her roommate, Lauren, moving about the living room. When Lauren finally noticed the packed backpack by the door, she frowned. Going somewhere? Hannah kept her gaze on the coffee. Just for a few days I need time alone. Lauren tilted her head. Time alone where? Blackwater Ridge, Hannah said, almost under her breath. I haven't been in years. Lauren's expression shifted from curiosity to concern. That trail is dangerous, hon. People get lost out there. I'll be fine, Hannah replied, forcing a small smile. I just need to clear my head. Narration would later paint this moment as the first sign, not of recklessness, but of resolve. Hannah had been carrying something heavy, something she wasn't ready to share. She left just after noon, her boots thumping against the stairs, the straps of her pack digging into her shoulders. The sun was high and bright, a deceptive contrast to the dark forest she was heading toward. The roadside store was 20 miles from the trailhead. A squat wooden building with a faded red roof and hand-painted sign that Red Ridge Supply Co. inside. The air was cool and smelled faintly of cedar. The store's security camera would later capture her moving through the aisles. Bottled water, trail mix, a small roll of duct tape, and oddly a fresh pack of batteries. She paid in cash, thanked the clerk, and stepped back into the sunlight. Heading up the ridge? The clerk had asked as she bagged the items. Hannah had nodded. Just for a couple of days. The clerk would later tell police she seemed calm, maybe too calm, as though her mind was elsewhere. By mid-afternoon, Hannah's silver sedan pulled into the gravel parking area at Blackwater Ridge. A few other cars were scattered there, their windshields glinting under the sun. The trail map at the entrance stood like a sentry, marked with bright red warnings about weather changes, cliff edges, and the absence of cell service. A couple descending the trail noticed her as she passed. The man offered a nod. The woman smiled. Going up late in the day? She asked. Just a short hike before camp. Hannah replied. It was the last confirmed conversation anyone had with her. The forest closed in quickly after the first half-mile, swallowing the warmth of the day. Sunlight broke through in fractured beams, painting the path in shifting gold. Hannah's breathing fell into rhythm with her steps, the weight of her pack a familiar anchor. From time to time, she paused to look back, not in fear, but as if to make sure the trail behind her remained. Her camera phone held a few snapshots from those first hours, a blurred shot of a waterfall, a close-up of moss on a fallen log, and one self-portrait, her face flushed, eyes shadowed, lips pressed in a line that could almost be mistaken for a smile. Later, investigators would note the absence of any messages sent or received after she left the trailhead. It was as though she had stepped into a place where the world beyond the trees no longer existed. That night, Lauren sent a casual text. Everything okay out there? It went unanswered. By the following evening, when Hannah didn't check in as promised, Lauren's concern sharpened. She called twice straight to voicemail before leaving a message. Hey, just checking. Call me when you get service, okay? No call came. When Hannah's parents were told, they weren't alarmed at first. Their daughter had always been independent, the kind of person who could vanish into the wilderness for a weekend and return, with stories of waterfalls no one else had seen. But by the third day, when her car was still sitting in the gravel lot, its windshield filmed with dust and pine needles, that independence felt less like a quirk and more like a warning. The first responding officer made note of the scene, vehicle secured. No signs of struggle. Trail register signed Hannah Brooks -8/27, 3:14 p.m. No return time indicated. He radioed back to dispatch. We might have a lost hiker on the ridge. Within hours, search and rescue teams were mobilized. As darkness settled over the mountains that evening. The first beams of flashlight cut through the trees, sweeping over ferns and roots, probing the shadows for any sign of her. The air grew colder, the night sounds sharper, an owl's call. The rustle of unseen creatures. Lauren stood at the trailhead with Ellen and Michael Brooks, all three of them staring into the blackness as though the forest might simply give. Her back. She's out there somewhere, Ellen whispered, though her hands trembled. The first official search logs would later mark that night as the beginning of the vanishing trail, a search that would stretch on for weeks and leave the forest holding more questions than answers. The first search began before dawn, the forest still wrapped in the blue haze of early morning. Deputies and volunteers gathered at the trailhead, stamping their boots against the cold ground. The air smelled of damp pine and distant rain. Sheriff Carter briefed them under the faded map nailed to the bulletin board. We're looking for any sign, clothing, tracks, discarded gear. Even something small could tell us where she went. The line of searchers stretched out along the rugged path, boots sinking into soft earth. The trail climbed in slow, relentless switchbacks, narrowing to where cedar branches scraped against their jackets. Dogs strained at their leashes, noses low, occasionally stopping to paw at the ground before moving on. By noon, the clouds had thickened. A fine drizzle began to fall, beating on the brims of hats and soaking through cotton shirts. They found nothing, not a footprint, not a shred of fabric. The next day brought more people. Experienced trackers from neighboring counties joined in, along with local hikers who knew the ridge better than anyone. They swept through ravines, crawled over fallen logs slick with moss, and peered into hollows where the shadows pooled like dark water. Every lead ended in nothing. Ellen and Michael Brooks arrived on the third day. They stood near the command tent, faces pale under the overcast sky. Ellen clutched a photo of Hannah, smiling, hair pulled back, standing in the kitchen of their old house. She handed it to every volunteer who passed, her voice steady but brittle. She had a red pack. Black hiking boots, please, just find her. Michael hovered nearby, his hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets, jaw tight. He watched the forest as if it might give their daughter back if he stared long enough. The search expanded to cover miles of dense terrain. Helicopters scanned from above, their rotors thundering through the valleys. From the air the ridge looked endless, a sea of dark green, broken only by narrow veins of rock and water. By the end of the first week, they'd found a discarded energy bar wrapper and a length of bright orange paracord. Both turned out to belong to other hikers. The rain worsened, washing away whatever faint traces might have been left. Back in town, the case began to shift in the public's imagination. The first rumor surfaced in the corner booth of a diner, that Hannah had been engaged and called it off just months before she vanished. A waitress repeated it to her neighbor, who told it at the gas station, where it was overheard by a man from the next county over. By the following week, the local paper hinted at recent personal changes in Hannah's life. Others whispered that she hadn't gone into the woods to be alone at all, but to meet someone. A man? No one could agree on who. Lauren, her roommate, kept replaying their last conversation in her head. Hannah had been packing her day pack, folding her rain jacket. With deliberate care. I just need a little time, she'd said, not looking up. Time for what? Lauren had asked. Hannah had smiled. That half smile she used when she was hiding something. To think. Lauren told the police everything she remembered, even the way Hannah had avoided eye contact. Still, they didn't seem interested. In speculation. We follow the evidence, Carter had told her. And right now, there isn't any. By the end of the second week, volunteers began drifting away. The weather turned colder, the nights longer. The ridge grew dangerous, slick rock, swollen streams. Sudden fog that swallowed the path whole. On day 18, the official search was scaled back. Carter made the announcement in a low voice, aware of the cameras. We have exhausted all viable search zones. Unless new information comes forward, we have no further ground operations planned. Ellen's voice broke when she spoke to the reporters. She's out there. I don't care how long it takes. I'm not giving up. Privately, Carter wrestled with the truth. They had no tracks, no gear, no body. In cases like this, the forest rarely gave back what it took. The Brooks family held a candlelight vigil in the town square the following week. Dozens gathered, their breath clouding in the cool evening air. Photos of Hannah lined the steps of the old courthouse, flickering in the glow of votive candles. Lauren spoke briefly, her voice shaking. "She's more than a headline. She's my friend, and she's still out there." Ellen and Michael stood hand in hand, their silhouettes sharp against the light. Somewhere beyond the crowd, the forest loomed, silent, impenetrable dot. By the start of the next month, media attention had faded. Another case had taken the headlines. A missing boater in the Sound. Hannah's story was relegated to a few inches in the back pages, then vanished entirely. At home, Ellen kept her daughter's room exactly as it had been, bed made, books stacked on the nightstand, the faint scent of lavender still lingering on the pillow. Michael retreated into work, leaving early and coming home late, the weight of unanswered questions pressing down on him. Lauren moved out the following spring. She left a note on the fridge for Ellen. "I'll never stop hoping." The years that followed blurred together. Birthdays came and went without candles or cake. Each August, Ellen returned to the trailhead with fresh flowers, leaving them at the base of the wooden map where the search had begun. In the quiet of their home, she sometimes thought she heard footsteps in the hall or the sound of the front door closing. Each time she told herself it was the wind. The case file gathered dust in a metal drawer at the sheriff's office. Carter kept it there, near the front, where he could see Hannah's name each time he opened it. He told himself he'd know if something changed. That if the forest ever gave up a piece of her, it would come to him. For 7 years, it didn't then. In the spring of 2019, a phone call came into dispatch from a fisherman at a remote lake. 15 miles from the trailhead, he'd pulled something from the water. Something with a name on it. The lake was a still mirror that morning, broken only by the lazy drag of fishing line across its surface. Spring in the Pacific Northwest had a way of holding on to winter's chill, and a thin mist clung to the water as if reluctant to let go. Tom Weller guided his aluminum boat toward the far shore, where the weeds grew thick and the base liked to hide. His 16-year-old son Josh sat at the bow, reeling in with the slow rhythm only early mornings could teach. "You're dragging weeds again," Tom muttered, watching the boy tug at something stubborn below the surface. Josh frowned. "It's heavy, feels weird." A dark shape emerged from the water, dripping and knotted with green strands. As Josh pulled, a corner of faded fabric broke through, thick, black, and slick with slime. The smell hit them before the shape was fully on deck, mud, rot, and something metallic. "What the hell?" Tom grabbed the handle, yanking it aboard. It was a waterproof backpack, the kind sold in outdoor gear shops. The seams were frayed, the zippers stiff with corrosion. Josh leaned in. "You think it belonged to someone who drowned?" Tom didn't answer. He unfastened the warped clips, forcing the zipper teeth apart until they gave with a gritty snap. Inside was a nest of waterlogged items, a matted flannel shirt, a compact mirror cracked down the middle, a wallet swollen with moisture, and something heavy wrapped in a torn plastic grocery bag. Tom peeled the bag away. A camcorder. Its once silver casing was dulled to mottled bronze with rust, the buttons stiff to the touch. Josh reached for the wallet. "Dad, there's an ID." The license had warped slightly, the ink bleeding at the edges, but the photo was still clear. Enough, a woman with auburn hair, her eyes fixed on the camera, as if bracing for something. The name read, Hannah Brooks. By noon, the sheriff's office had taped off the small dock where Tom had pulled the boat ashore. Deputies moved in quiet, deliberate motions, photographing the bag's contents as they were laid out on a clean blue tarp. Sheriff Carter stood with one hand on his hip, his other holding the license up to the light. 7 years, he murmured. "And this turns up now." A deputy glanced at him. Could have been washed down from anywhere in the ridge. Carter's jaw tightened. Or it's been sitting out there the whole time, waiting for someone to trip over it. He didn't say what everyone else was thinking, that the camcorder might be more than just a piece of decayed electronics. If its memory card had survived, The Brooks family got the call just after 2 p.m., Ellen answered, her voice tight with the guarded politeness she'd developed over the years whenever the police contacted them. "Mrs. Brooks?" Carter said. "I think you should come down to the station." Michael took the phone from her, his hand trembling. "Is it about Hannah?" "Yes," Carter replied. "We found something of hers." The drive into town was silent except for the sound of the windshield wipers clearing a fine mist. Ellen clutched the seatbelt against her chest as if bracing. For impact. At the station, Carter met them in the hallway outside the evidence room. On the table behind him sat the backpack, its fabric still damp in spots. The camcorder lay beside it, tagged and bagged. Ellen reached out, her fingers grazing the edge of the evidence bag containing Hannah's license. "She had this in her pocket when she left," she whispered. Michael swallowed hard. "What was it doing in the lake?" "That's what we aim to find out," Carter said. "We've sent the camcorder to the lab in Olympia. If the memory card's intact, we might be able to recover footage." Ellen closed her eyes. "And if you do, then we'll finally know something." By the next morning, the story had broken camcorder found in 7-year-old missing hiker CSC. The headline scrolled across every local station, picked up by regional news within hours. The anchor's voice was cool and practiced. In a strange turn of events, personal belongings belonging to Hannah Brooks, missing since August 2012, were recovered yesterday in a remote lake. Reporters parked along the gravel road leading to the Brooks home, their van sprouting satellite dishes like invasive weeds. Camera lenses followed Ellen to the mailbox, recorded Michael pacing the porch with tight, clipped steps. "Do you believe she's still alive?" A voice shouted from the crowd. Ellen kept walking. Lauren, Hannah's former roommate, saw the news on her lunch break and froze mid-bite. The image of Hannah's license flashed on the TV screen, followed by the still photo the two of them had taken in the apartment kitchen the week before Hannah's trip. She dug her phone from her bag, staring at Carter's number. For years she had avoided calling him, knowing there was nothing new she could offer. Now, she wondered if the camcorder might hold something she'd been afraid to say out loud, that Hannah hadn't told her the whole truth about where she was. Going that day. At the sheriff's office, Carter stood with Detective Rayner in front of a whiteboard covered in old photos, topographic maps, and timelines. "If the bag was in the lake the whole time," Rayner said, "why didn't the divers find it during the original search?" "Because the lake wasn't in our original search radius," Carter replied. "It's 15 miles from the trailhead, no direct path connecting them." Rayner frowned. "So how does a hiker vanish on Blackwater Ridge and end up here?" That, Carter said, glancing toward the evidence locker, "is what that camera might tell us." For the Brooks family, the days that followed were a strange purgatory, trapped between relief that something had finally surfaced and dread about what might come with it. Ellen found herself staring at the phone late into the night, half expecting Hannah to call as if no time had passed. Michael busied himself in the garage, repairing things that didn't need fixing, his hands needing something to do while his mind churned with the possibilities. 3 days after the discovery, Carter called them back to the station. The lab in Olympia had finished its work. The memory card had survived. The camcorder contained several short clips, some filmed in daylight, some in the dark. The first was dated August 26, 2012. The last was time-stamped just after midnight. The following day. Carter didn't say what they showed over the phone. "It's better if you see for yourselves," he said. Ellen's hand tightened around the receiver. "And if we don't want to, then I'll tell you what's on it, but I think you'll want to decide with your own eyes." The meeting was set for the next morning. That night, rain fell steady over the ridge, running in silver threads down the darkened windows of the Brooks home. Ellen lay awake beside Michael, both of them staring into the quiet. Somewhere in the evidence locker downtown, a rusted camcorder sat waiting to speak for Hannah. The conference room was small, windowless, and heavy with the smell of burnt coffee. A faint hum from the fluorescent lights buzzed in the corners, just loud enough to fray nerves. Detective Aaron Bell stood beside the table, a black evidence box resting in front of him. Inside, carefully bagged, was the battered Sony Handycam recovered from the bottom of Lake Tilson. The casing was pitted with rust, the lens scratched and clouded. But the data card miraculously had survived. Across the table sat Ellen and Michael Brooks. Ellen's hands were clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Michael's jaw was locked, eyes fixed on the camcorder as if willing it to give up every answer it had kept hidden for 7 years. The door opened, and Detective Rivas stepped in, carrying a laptop already hooked to an external reader. Recovered. Most of the files, she said, her voice low, almost reverent. Some had water damage, but the main sequence is intact. Bell nodded. Let's start from the beginning. The first clip filled the monitor with a sudden burst of sunlight and movement. The lens adjusted, focusing on a young woman with a wind-tossed braid and a familiar smile. Hannah Brooks. Day 1, she said cheerfully, her voice carrying the warmth. Ellen remembered. I'm finally here. Been planning this forever. Just me, the trail, and some quiet. She swung the camera to show the forest behind her, towering cedars, dappled light spilling across the mossy ground. No work emails, no phone calls, no noise, just breathing. Ellen's eyes brimmed with tears. Michael's lips pressed into a hard line. The footage cut to Hannah crossing a narrow footbridge over a stream, her boots scuffing the wooden planks. She turned the camera on herself again. Made it to mile 3. Stopped for lunch. Haven't seen another soul out? Here, it's perfect. She grinned, almost childlike, then aimed the lens upward. Catching a hawk circling high against the blue, the next clip was different. The lighting was dimmer, the image grainy. Hannah sat inside her tent, headlamp casting sharp shadows across. Her face, she was speaking more quietly now, her voice tight. So, weird thing, she began, glancing toward the zipped flap. I thought I heard footsteps earlier, not close, but enough to notice. Could be nothing. Could be my brain just... She shook her head and forced a laugh. Whatever, just me being paranoid. Michael shifted in his seat, his knee bouncing. Another jump in the timeline. Hannah was walking, camera angled over her shoulder to show the trail winding behind her. Her breath was quick, her eyes flicking to the side every few seconds. Okay, so... I'm not imagining it, she said, voice low. Someone's out here? I've seen movement, like shapes between the trees. When I stop, it stops. When I start again, I hear it. She swallowed hard, her hand tightening on the strap of her pack. If this makes it to anyone, just know I was right. Ellen's hand flew to her mouth. The final clip was the most unsettling. The camera shook as Hannah stumbled along a rocky slope, breath ragged. The daylight was fading fast, shadows pooling deep in the gullies. Every few steps she turned, the lens darting toward the trees. I can't... Her voice broke. She whipped the camera around, catching a blur of something in the distance. A figure, maybe, but so quick it vanished between the trunks. Her pace quickened. The camera jolted violently as she tripped, then righted herself. It's following me, she whispered. It's been... The image jerked sideways, sky spinning, and then the footage stopped. For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the faint whir of the laptop's fan. Ellen stared at the black screen, her tears finally spilling over. Michael leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes narrowed as if trying to force the clip to play on. What happened next? Ellen asked, her voice trembling. Bell's answer was gentle, but firm. That's all there is. Michael exhaled sharply, shaking his head. There has to be more. You can't tell me she just... He gestured toward the laptop. Vanished. Right after that. Rivas closed the laptop with care, as though the device itself was fragile. We'll send it to the lab. There might be recoverable fragments, audio traces, background details we can enhance. But for now, this is what we've got. Bell leaned back, considering. Whatever happened, it wasn't just her deciding to disappear. She knew someone was there. Or she thought she did, Rivas added carefully. Fear plays tricks. Michael shot her a hard look. That didn't look like fear playing tricks. That looked real. Ellen's voice was almost a whisper. You saw it too, that shape, Rivas hesitated. We'll review it frame by frame. Could be a hiker, could be an animal. Ellen shook her head. It was neither. Bell pushed the evidence box a little closer to himself, fingers drumming against the cardboard. We'll start with the location markers. See if we can match terrain features from the footage to the search. Maps from 2012 narrow down where she was when those last clips were filmed. Rivas nodded, already making notes. Ellen and Michael rose slowly, as if each movement took deliberate effort. Michael paused at the door. If she was scared enough to record that, he said, then someone out there knows exactly what happened. Bell didn't argue. When the Brookses left, Bell lingered in the room. He reopened the laptop and replayed the last clip in silence. He watched Hannah's face, the quick dart of her eyes, the sharp intake of breath, and then the fleeting blur. Between the trees, he froze the frame, zoomed in until the pixels smeared. Whatever it was, it had shape, weight, presence, but not enough clarity to name. He sat back, unsettled. Rivas returned with 2 coffees and a folder thick with printed maps. We'll need to get a team back up there, she said, sliding the folder across. Bell's eyes lingered on the still frame a moment longer before closing the laptop. Yeah, he said quietly. Soon, before the trail swallows it all again. He tucked the camcorder back into its evidence bag, sealing it shut. The rusted device felt heavier than it should, as if it carried not just the footage, but the weight of 7 lost years. Somewhere out in that forest was the rest of the story, and now they were going back to find it. The lab's report landed on Detective Bell's desk 3 days after the playback. A thick manila envelope, sealed and marked priority, sat on top of the morning's stack of case files. Bell slid it open with his thumb, pulling out the printed summary and a small USB drive. Audio enhancement file. HB 2012-04, segment 3. He plugged the drive into his laptop, the screen filling with the familiar, grainy image of Hannah's last coherent clip. The forest pressed in around her, her voice low and urgent. It's following me. It's been... Then came the rustle of foliage, the sharp intake of her breath. The lab's enhancement picked up what Bell had barely noticed before. A faint murmur under the ambient noise. It was low, distorted, almost masked by the wind. Pause, Bell muttered. He looped the segment dot this time, with the background noise filtered out. The sound became clear enough to make the hair on his neck rise. A male voice, faint but distinct, just a handful of words. Hannah, wait, please. Bell leaned back, staring at the frozen frame of the forest. By mid-morning, he and Rivas were in the audio lab, the clip playing through high-end monitors. That's not random noise, Rivas said flatly. No, Bell agreed, that's a voice, and it's not friendly. The tech analyst on duty, a wiry man named Colin, glanced over his shoulder. I ran it through spectral analysis. The tone matches a male speaker, approximate age range mid-30s to mid-40s. Vocal pattern slight rasp, possible from smoking. I cross-checked the database of known persons of interest from missing persons cases in Washington state from 2010 to 2015, Bell arched an eyebrow. And one name stood out, Colin said, swiveling back to his screen. A mugshot filled the display, a man in his late 30s, narrow face, thin lips, eyes sharp with something between defiance and emptiness. Evan Cross arrested, twice for stalking, once for harassment. Served 18 months. Out since 2010. Rivas leaned in. Where? Seattle area. But his last known address in 2012 was about 40 miles from the trail where Hannah disappeared. Bell stared at the image. We need to know if she knew him. The Brookses didn't recognize the name. Ellen shook her head immediately, though Michael studied the mugshot with a deepening frown. No, he said at last. I remember him. Hannah didn't. She wouldn't be around someone like that. But the next stop told a different story. Hannah's best friend, Lauren Myers, still lived in the same small apartment in Tacoma. She greeted Bell and Rivas with cautious politeness, but the moment they showed her the photo, her expression faltered. I was hoping you'd never ask me that, Lauren said quietly, sinking into her couch. She picked at the frayed seam of a cushion, avoiding their eyes. Yes, I know him, and yes, Hannah knew him too. How? Belle asked. Lauren hesitated, then sighed. She met him at a coffee shop in Olympia, early 2012. She thought he was intense, but interesting. He told her he was a photographer, that he liked taking pictures of the forest, wildlife, all that. She was going through a rough patch then. The breakup, stress at work, and I think she liked the attention. Rivaz's pen scratched across her notebook. Breakup? Lauren nodded. She was engaged to a guy named Chris, but it fell apart in January. Hannah didn't talk about it much, just said it was ugly, and then Evan showed up. I told her he gave me bad vibes, that his questions were personal. Too personal, but she didn't want to hear it. Belle leaned forward. Did she know about his record? No, or if she did, she never told me, but by summer she'd started avoiding talking about him. She said they were keeping things quiet. And then, Lauren's voice caught, and then she went on that trip. She didn't tell me she was going. I only found out when you guys called me after she disappeared. Rivaz glanced at Belle. Keeping things quiet sounded an awful lot like hiding. Something back at the precinct. Belle pulled Cross's file. His stalking convictions were ugly, ex-girlfriends, co-workers, a neighbor. In each case, the same pattern: fixation, unwanted gifts showing up at their workplace or home, escalating to following them on foot or in his car. The restraining orders had expired years ago, but the pattern was chilling. The last documented incident before Hannah's disappearance was a trespassing complaint filed by a woman named Rebecca Sloan in 2011. Cross had been found outside her apartment at 3 a.m., claiming he was just passing through. Belle tapped the photo paper clip to the file. He's our guy, Rivaz. Maybe, she countered. But we've got voice. Analysis, an unclear connection, and a friend's reluctant confirmation. That's not enough to bring him in after 7 years. Then we find more. 2 days later they did. A search warrant turned up Cross's old storage unit in Tacoma, forgotten. Unpaid, contents slated for auction. Inside, under a tarp, they found a warped cardboard box. Inside the box, stacks of Polaroids. Most were landscapes, but a few, just a few, made Belle's pulse quicken. They were of Hannah, sung candid from a distance. Her walking down a street in Olympia, leaving the grocery store, sitting at a cafe table with a book. One, unsettlingly close, showed her in her apartment building's parking lot, glancing toward the camera as if she'd just noticed it. When they confronted Lauren with the photos, she went pale. She never told me about these, she whispered. If she had, I would have. Belle cut her off gently. We believe he followed her, possibly to the trail. Lauren's voice was almost inaudible. Then she wasn't just paranoid. Belle stared at the evidence laid out on the table that night. The photos, the enhanced audio transcript, the mugshot. A picture was forming, but there were still holes big enough to swallow the truth whole. Cross was still out there. The last DMV record placed him renewing a license in Spokane in 2018, but no current address, no job on record, no phone listed, like he vanished. Rivaz muttered. Dope. Belle thought of the forest in the camcorder footage, the way the trees seemed to close. In swallowing light. People like him don't vanish, Belle said quietly. They watch. They wait. That night, Belle filed for a formal warrant to locate and question Evan Cross. It would take time. And time was the one thing this case had already eaten alive. Somewhere in Washington, a man knew exactly what had happened to Hannah Brooks, and Belle was going to find him. Detective Belle knew the hunt for Evan Cross would be easier if he understood why Hannah had gone with him in the first place. People didn't just walk into the woods with dangerous men without a reason, or at least, without believing they had one. It started with the journals. Lauren produced them reluctantly. A shoebox filled with battered leather-bound books and spiral notebooks. She made me promise not to read them unless... Lauren hesitated, swallowing hard. Unless something happened to her. Belle and Rivaz took them back to the precinct. The entries from early 2012 were ordinary. Work gripes, sketches of hiking trails, lists of books to read. Then, around February, the tone shifted. February 17th, Daniel says I'm overreacting. He doesn't understand that I feel trapped. Like My life is already decided and I never got to choose. Daniel, that was Hannah's fiancé. The man her parents had believed she'd marry that fall. Belle found Daniel Morton Isley, a successful financial advisor with an office overlooking the Sound. He agreed to meet in a quiet cafe. Though his wariness was clear the moment Belle slid into the booth across from him. I told the police everything back then, Daniel began. We broke off the engagement in January. She wanted space. I respected that. Her friend says it wasn't mutual, Belle replied. Daniel's jaw tightened. She changed. After she met someone. I never met him, but I knew. She was distant, distracted. She'd come home late, wouldn't say where she'd been. Belle slid a photo of Evan Cross across the table. Daniel's eyes flicked to it, then away. That's him, isn't it? The one from the news. She said he understood her, that I didn't. The journals filled in the blanks. March 3rd, met E again today. We talked for hours. He says I've been taught to accept the cage and call it safety. That's not living. March 28th, Daniel says I'm making a mistake. But E says fear is the enemy of truth. Maybe love is choosing the person who shows you the bars and says, I'll break them. April 5th, 10th, he says we can disappear for a while. Just us. No noise. No one telling me who to be. Rivas read the entries aloud in the evidence room, her voice low. It's grooming, classic, Belle nodded grimly. He isolates her from her fiancé, from her friends, and then offers himself as the only way out. They found confirmation in Lauren's recollection. By June, she barely talked to me. If I asked about Evan, she'd smile like I was missing the point. She told me once, you can't understand until you felt it. The freedom of walking away from everything. Lauren hesitated before adding, the last time I saw her, she hugged me and said, if I don't come back, remember it. Was my choice. I thought she was being dramatic. Belle stared at that line in his notes. My choice. It wasn't the phrasing of someone expecting a crime, but of someone convinced she was in control. That illusion was Evan Cross's greatest weapon. The deeper they dug, the more Belle saw a pattern. Cross's prior victims had all described the same intoxicating mix, intense attention, declarations of destiny, and then subtle threats of what would happen if they left. One woman wrote in her restraining order affidavit, he made me feel like I couldn't breathe without him, and then he made me afraid to try. A breakthrough came when Rivas traced a prepaid cell phone Hannah had purchased 2 weeks before. The trip. The number had exchanged dozens of texts with a second burner registered under a false name. Colin, the tech analyst, pulled the recovered messages. Most were mundane trail recommendations, weather updates, but a few stood out. July 26, 2012, 8:42 p.m. Evan, we leave before dawn. Less chance of being followed. July 27, 2012, 10:03 a.m. Hannah. Packed light, ready. Belle stared at the time stamp. July 27th was the day she told her roommate she needed time alone. Armed with the new timeline, Belle and Rivas reconstructed. Hannah's final weeks, January. Breakup with Daniel. February, March. Frequent. Secret meetings with Evan Cross. April, May. Journal entries. Reflect deepening dependence and romantic fixation. July 13th. Buys new hiking gear. July 20th. Withdraws. $600 cash. July 27th. Leaves for the trail with minimal supplies. No tent, no sleeping. Bag only what would fit in a small pack. Everything pointed to one conclusion. This was not a spontaneous hike. It was a planned disappearance with Evan Cross. Ellen Brooks was quiet for a long time after Belle explained the findings. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. She thought she was in love. Michael Brooks's reaction was harder, more brittle. No, she was manipulated. That's not the same thing. Belle didn't disagree. But he also knew the difference mattered little now. The result was the same. Hannah had walked into the forest believing Evan Cross was her way out. That night, Belle reread the last journal. Entry, dated July 26, 2012. Tomorrow I choose. Not between people, but between lives. One is safe, one is real. I've been safe long enough. The next page was blank. The following morning, Rivas burst into Belle's office. Got something. Cross's old landlord from 2012 remembers him leaving suddenly, owing a month's rent. Says he saw him loading camping gear into a truck, and someone else was with him. A woman with long brown hair. Belle's pulse kicked. Did he get a plate number? No, but he remembers the truck had Oregon plates. It was the first tangible link placing Cross and Hannah together before she vanished. Belle leaned over the caseboard, tracing the red thread from Hannah's apartment to Evan's rental to the trailhead. Each step was deliberate, planned. The pieces fit too well to be coincidence, yet one thing gnawed at him. Why had she written love over safety in her journal, as if she understood the risk and embraced it? What had he told her that made danger feel like freedom? Rivas seemed to read his mind. If we can answer that, she said, we'll know what really happened out there. Belle looked at the photo of Evan Cross pinned to the board. His eyes seemed to meet Belle's with a quiet challenge, as if daring him to follow the trail Hannah had taken. Belle intended to accept that dare, because somewhere beyond that last journal entry, in the space between safe and real, the truth waited, and it was still watching. The tech lab was silent except for the hum of servers and the faint click of the playback controls. Detective Belle stood behind Colin's shoulder, eyes locked on the monitor as the recovered footage flickered to life. A shaky frame showed pine trees stretching skyward, their tips haloed by sunlight. The camera tilted down to reveal Hannah, hair pulled into a messy braid, a faint smile curving her lips. Her backpack looked lighter than any seasoned hiker's would be for a multi-day trip. Day 1, Evan's voice drawled from behind the lens. Our big adventure. Hannah glanced at him, smiling again, but her eyes darted away too quickly, as if unsure how wide to make that smile. Belle didn't miss it. Pause, zoom in, Colin did. Even through the grain of old digital video, Belle could see it. Tension pooled at the corners of her mouth, a shadow in her gaze. The early footage was calm. They followed a narrow trail cutting between towering cedars, Evan narrating with a smug cheeriness. He made little jokes about being off the grid and free from the world's nonsense. Hannah responded in clipped phrases, her voice polite but thin-dyed. By late afternoon, the light shifted. The footage caught the orange wash of sunset spilling over mossy boulders. Evan set up camp, a single small tent, the kind meant for one person. Hannah knelt by the fire pit, striking matches. That wouldn't light. Her shoulders looked tense, rigid. Rivas leaned closer to the screen. She doesn't look like she wants to be there. Or she's already realizing she's in over her head, Belle murmured. Night fell abruptly in the footage. The darkness swallowed the trees, leaving only the thin white beam of a flashlight swaying with each movement. The audio hissed with static, but voices bled through. Hannah, I'm cold. I want to go home. Evan, this is home. You said you wanted real life, remember? Hannah, I didn't think. Evan, stop thinking. The flashlight swung wildly, bouncing off tree trunks, throwing long, twisted shadows. Then came the moment that froze everyone in the room. Colin paused the footage mid-frame. The flashlight caught something between the trees. Not Evan, not Hannah. A shape, the outline of a human figure, barely discernible in the static and flicker. It was motionless, its face obscured, but its posture suggested watching. Belle's voice was steady. Rewind. Play it again. They watched twice, 3 times. The shadow was there every time, positioned just far enough back to be outside the beam's core, yet close enough to see them. Rivas exhaled sharply. So it wasn't just them out there, Belle's mind spun. If Evan had brought Hannah willingly, then who was the third presence? Another hiker, someone following them, or someone Evan knew? The footage jumped forward as if several minutes were missing. Now Evan's voice was louder, sharper, cutting through the static. Evan, you can't quit now. We're almost there. Hannah, where? Even. Trust me. Her reply was drowned out by the crunch of footsteps on dry leaves. More than 2 sets. The last clip was the worst. The camera lay on its side in the dirt, tilted so the frame was half pine needles, half blackness. In the distance, a flashlight beam jerked and shook, accompanied by the sound of Hannah's voice breaking, "Please, I don't," then silence. The screen went black. Colin hit pause and turned in his chair. "That's all there is." Battery died after that. Bell stood still for a long moment, staring at the frozen black screen. "Run enhancement on the shadow frame. And the footsteps, see if we can separate them by pattern and wait." Colin nodded, already tapping commands. Rivas turned to Bell. "If there was a third person, Evan might not be our only problem." Bell's gaze drifted to the evidence board where Hannah's final journal entry hung beside the trail map. The words "one is safe, one is real" echoed in his mind. That afternoon, they brought Hannah's parents back in to view the footage. Ellen Brooks sat stiffly, hands clutched in her lap. Michael leaned forward, jaw tight, when Hannah's voice said, "I want to go home." Ellen flinched. She was scared. Ellen whispered. Michael's voice was iron, and he didn't let her leave. Bell didn't argue. There was no point in softening the truth. Back in the lab, Colin's enhancements revealed more. The shadow behind the trees was wearing something light-colored, possibly a jacket, and appeared to be taller than Evan. The figure's head turned slightly, suggesting it was aware of the camera. The audio filters teased out faint differences in the footsteps. One set was heavy, deliberate. Another was lighter, quicker. And then there was a third, slow, almost cautious, as if trailing whoever that is, Rivas said. "They're not just passing by?" Bell knew they had to push forward before the trail went cold again. They cross-referenced known hikers on that route in late July 2012, focusing on those with records of violence or stalking. Only two stood out. One was in prison at the time. The other lived over 200 miles away, which left the possibility no one wanted to say aloud. The unknown figure had been there because of Evan Cross. The footage also revealed something subtle. A landmark. In one frame, just before nightfall, a jagged rock formation jutted behind Hannah's shoulder, its surface carved with strange grooves. "That's Devil's Spine," said a ranger Bell consulted later. "About 8 miles from the main trailhead. It's off the marked route. Most people don't go near it unless they know the area well." Bell added a new red pin to the map. "Then that's where we start." As evening fell over the precinct, Bell lingered at his desk, watching the footage one more time. Hannah's nervous smile, Evan's coaxing tone. The figure in the shadows. It was all a puzzle with pieces that didn't want to fit. But one thing was certain. The woods had held more than just two people that night, and if Bell was going to find out what happened after the camera went dark, he'd have to follow Hannah's path into that forest, knowing someone else might still be there, waiting. The rain began as a whisper, a faint patter against leaves in the recovered footage, but within minutes, it became a torrent. Detective. Bell had already been staring at the Devil's Spine frame for hours when Colin appeared in the doorway. "We found something else," he said, holding up a freshly restored segment from the camcorder. The screen flickered to life. Hannah's voice, sharp with panic, cut through the static. "Evan, stop! Just stop!" The lens lurched violently, the image tilting skyward to a smear of gray clouds before crashing back down to the forest floor. Water streaked the view, each droplet catching the faint glow of the flashlight, somewhere beyond the rain. A low rumble rolled through the trees, thunder. Close and building. They had been following the faint clue from Chapter 7, the rock formation, when the enhanced audio revealed this storm sequence. It was time-stamped hours after the shadow sighting. Hannah was running. The camera's view bucked with each stride, showing flashes of slick moss, wet roots, and the glint of water pooling on the trail. Her breathing came fast, ragged, then a voice, not Evan's, deeper, strained, almost gasping. "Wait!" Bell's pulse quickened. Pause. "Is that Evan?" Colin shook his head. "Doesn't match his voice profile." "This is our third person." The rain intensified in the footage, hammering the microphone until words dissolved into muffled shapes. Lightning flared, just long enough to throw the forest into stark relief. In that frozen white instant, the camera caught movement far ahead, a figure darting between two trees. No clear face, just the pale flash of skin at the wrist, the edge of a jacket whipping in the wind. Hannah's voice again, closer to the microphone now. "Leave me alone!" The screen jumped. An abrupt cut, either the result of a jolt or the camcorder hitting the ground. The image returned in a sickening spin. Hannah's face, upside down, rain dripping from her braid, her expression caught between fury and terror. She reached for the lens, as if to block it, but before she could, a scream ripped through the forest. It wasn't hers. It was deeper, rawer, echoing from somewhere behind her. It carried for 3 full seconds before cutting off mid-breath. Replaced by the thud of something hitting the ground, Belle's skin prickled. They replayed it several times. The scream had an unmistakable edge of pain, but also fear. Rivas crossed his arms. If that's Evan, he wasn't in control anymore. Or, Belle countered, he'd just found someone who could take it away from him. The storm distorted everything. Between the rain's roar and the wind's howl, the rest of the audio became almost unintelligible. But through filtering, Colin teased out fragments. "Hannah, please, unknown male, this way." Belle couldn't tell if the stranger was luring her or helping her. Outside the footage, the real weather was matching the memory. The Pacific Northwest sky over the search site had turned a bruised gray that morning. Belle stood with the ranger at the base of Devil's Spine, boots sinking into soft mud. This storm pattern matches the one from July 27th, 2012, the ranger said. Up here, storms like that can change everything. Paths wash out, landmarks disappear, which meant finding where that scream came from would be like chasing a ghost through a maze that had reshaped itself 7 years ago. They pushed deeper into the forest, following the same general direction Hannah had been running in the video. The ground was uneven, littered with slick stones and fallen branches. Rivas stopped to study a ridge in the terrain. If she was heading downhill, she could have been trying to get to lower ground for shelter. Belle nodded. And the scream came from uphill, which means whoever it was, they were behind her until he didn't finish. The image of that abrupt silence after the scream didn't need words. Back at the lab that evening, Cullen presented a new find. He'd isolated the final seconds of the storm clip and enhanced the background. The result was faint. But there, after the scream, after the thud, came another sound. A slow, deliberate crunch of footsteps moving away. Not running, walking could be Evan, Rivas said, or the third man, Belle replied. But if it's Evan, why leave her? And if it's the other guy, what happened to Evan? That was the problem. For the first time, the narrative wasn't clean predator and prey. The storm sequence suggested the roles could have shifted in an instant. Belle looked at the whiteboard. Possibility 1. Evan attacked Hannah. Stranger intervened. Possibility 2. Stranger attacked both. Possibility 3. Stranger targeted Evan, Hannah. Caught in crossfire, none of them explained why Hannah never came out of the woods. Ellen Brooks called that night. "You said there was a scream," she said, her voice trembling. "Do you think that's when Belle cut her off gently?" "We don't know yet, but I promise we're closer than we've ever been." He hung up, knowing closer still meant years of distance. The next morning, the tech team delivered one final frame from the storm footage. A still captured in the lightning flash just after the scream. It showed Hannah mid-run, mouth open, eyes wide, and in the far background, a blurred shape lying on the ground. Next to it, just visible in the corner of the frame, was a boot. The tread didn't match Evan's known footwear. Belle's gut tightened. If the boot belonged to the third person, then someone else had remained standing when the camera cut out. And, if that someone walked away into the storm, they could still be walking somewhere now. The clearing was smaller than Belle had imagined. In the restored footage, it was barely more than a patch of trampled grass ringed by tall firs, their black silhouettes closing in like sentinels. Hannah sat in the middle of it, rain still dripping from her braid, her jacket plastered to her frame. The storm had quieted into a soft, steady fall, the kind that muffles every sound except your own heartbeat. The time stamp on the corner of the frame read July 28th, 2012, 2:13 a.m. Her voice was a whisper, but the microphone caught every syllable. "If you find this, it wasn't an accident." Belle froze the image on her face. The raw fear there didn't match the earlier clips where she'd masked it behind half-smiles and shaky jokes. Her eyes glistened, reflecting the faint beam of the camcorder's own light. But more than fear, there was certainty. She knew. "Something," Rivas murmured. "Or someone," Belle replied. And she knew they were close. In the footage, Hannah's gaze shifted sharply to her left, toward something beyond the frame. The camcorder jerked with her movement. Leaves rustled, not the gentle sway of wind, but the crisp snap of a branch underfoot. Her breathing quickened. "No," she said, so softly it could have been to herself. Then came the jolt. The image lurched sideways, a smear of green and brown as the camera tumbled. For a half-second, the lens caught a shadow crossing the beam of its own light, not quite a full silhouette, but enough to suggest broad shoulders and a hood pulled low. The screen went black dot in the lab. Colin leaned back from the monitor. "That's the end of the tape," Belle frowned. "Until the blackout, how much time passed from the scream in the last chapter's clip to this?" "About 90 minutes, Colin said. "Which means she survived whatever happened in the storm, at least for a while." Rivas tapped the side of the monitor. "And she knew she might not survive the rest." The forensics report arrived 2 days later. The blood smear on the lens was small, no more than a few droplets, but it was fresh at the time of recording. And it was Hannah's. There was no way to tell if it was from an injury or a struggle. What chilled Belle was the secondary finding. Microscopic traces of another person's skin cells on the camera's grip. Too degraded for DNA comparison, but enough to confirm that at some point before the blackout, someone else had handled it. Belle played the clip again, this time focusing not on Hannah's words, but the background. There was a faint hum, not electrical, but human. A kind of low, continuous sound, almost like someone breathing through clenched teeth. Colin ran it through audio isolation. "Could be Evan, could be our third guy." "Or both," Belle said. The next step was geography. If the storm footage had placed her near Devil's Spine, then this clearing had to be somewhere within a 2-hour travel radius on foot, factoring in darkness, rain, and the possibility she'd been disoriented or led off trail. The ranger marked 3 potential zones on the map. Zone 2 caught Belle's attention. It bordered a disused logging road from the 1980s, now overgrown and known mostly to hunters. If she ended up here, Belle said, someone knew the terrain well enough to get her off the main trail without anyone noticing. The theory gained weight when they revisited Evan Cross's known history. One of his early arrests for trespassing had been on private timberland less than 5 miles from that road. He'd been caught with a topo map marked in pencil, but when confronted in the interview room, Evan leaned back and smirked. "You think I took her there? I didn't have to. She came looking for me." Belle didn't buy it, but he also didn't. Missed the flicker of something in Evan's eyes when he heard the phrase "small clearing." Ellen Brooks came to view the last clip. Belle warned her it would be hard to watch, but she insisted. When Hannah whispered, "If you find this." It wasn't an accident. Ellen's hand went to her mouth. "She's talking to me," Ellen said softly. "She's telling me not to." "Believe them." "Believe who?" Belle asked. Ellen's answer was immediate. "Whoever tells me she just got lost." By late evening, Belle had all the frames from the clip printed and spread across the table. One image in particular drew his eye, a still taken from the instant before the blackout. In the far left corner, partially obscured by motion blur, there was the faint suggestion of something reflective at chest height. A badge? A zipper? Or... Rivas leaned over. "Looks like a metal clasp, from a backpack strap, maybe." Belle filed it away. A reflective clasp could mean the person wasn't dressed for stealth. Or it could mean they didn't care about being seen. The final task was psychological reconstruction. Why would Hannah turn the camera on herself in that moment? Belle's working theory. She'd realized help wasn't coming. So she decided to leave a message that would survive her, even if she didn't. That meant she trusted the camcorder more than the people around her. As the night wore on, Belle stood at the evidence board. In one column, he listed what they knew about Evan: manipulative, familiar with the area, present during at least part of the hike. In another, the unknown man, deeper voice, possibly injured in the storm, possibly the last person to see her. A live dot at the center, he pinned a still of Hannah from the last clip. Eyes locked on something just out of view. The next step was clear. If they could find the clearing, they might find the answers buried with it. At dawn, the search team gathered. At the edge of Zone 2, mist clung to the treetops, and the ground was slick from overnight rain. Belle scanned the horizon, listening to the forest breathe. Somewhere in this expanse, Hannah had left her last message. And somewhere nearby, someone had made sure she couldn't leave another. Belle adjusted his pack. We're not stopping until we find it. They didn't find the clearing that first day. By mid-afternoon, the rain returned, hammering down hard enough to blur the map in Belle's hands. The terrain was more treacherous than the ranger's notes had suggested. Uneven ground tangled with roots, drop-offs hidden by moss, and the occasional sharp scent of wet cedar. Rivas kept glancing at his watch. If she made it through here? At night in that storm, someone was leading her. Belle agreed. Which was why their next move had to be finding the one man still alive who could confirm it. Evan Cross had vanished from public records in late 2013. No property in his name. No bank accounts, no driver's license renewals. Then 3 weeks into the reopened investigation, a hit came from a traffic camera in rural Idaho. The system flagged him under a different name. Mark Ellery, driving a rusted Ford pickup. The plate led to a rental cabin by the Clearwater River. Belle and Rivas arrived at dawn. Mist curled off the water, and the cabin's chimney puffed thin smoke. Evan opened the door shirtless, a faded tattoo curling over his collarbone. For a moment, he just stared at them, as though deciding whether to slam the door or invite them in. You took your time, he finally said. Inside, the cabin was sparse. One couch, a wood stove, a stack of hunting magazines. No photographs. No sign of anyone else living there. Belle started the recorder. You know why we're here? Evan smiled faintly. Hannah. Rivas leaned forward. We've got footage of you with her on the trail. We've got her on camera saying it wasn't an accident. And we've got you disappearing for 7 years under a fake name. That's not a crime, Evan said. It is when you're avoiding a homicide investigation. Belle replied. Evan's account came haltingly, as though he was deciding in real time which version to tell. She wanted to get away from her life. He said, from him. You mean Daniel, her fiancé? Belle said. Evan's jaw twitched. He had her caged. I didn't. I told her we could make it work. Just the two of us, but out there, something changed. He described hiking north of Devil's Spine, setting up camp near the cliffs. In his telling, Hannah slipped while moving between 2 rock ledges. It was raining. Ground was slick. She went down fast, he said, his voice flat. I couldn't get to her. Rivas glanced at Belle. And you just left her there? Evan's eyes hardened. I went for help. That I wasn't the only one in those woods. Belle pressed him for details. A man, big, hooded, been trailing us since the second day. I thought maybe he was some kind of ranger, but he never came close enough to speak. That night in the storm, I heard him. Behind us, then she was gone. It was the first time his voice cracked, not from grief, but from something closer to anger. The inconsistencies piled quickly. If Hannah had fallen near the cliffs, why had the camcorder with blood on it been found miles away in a lake? If Evan had gone for help, why wasn't there a single witness who saw him emerge from the trail? And if the hooded man was responsible, why hadn't Evan mentioned him in his original 2012 statement? I didn't trust the cops then. He said, still don't. Belle studied him. You've had 7 years to come up with that story. Doesn't sound like you've convinced yourself. Evan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I'm telling you the truth. You think I'm a monster, fine. But there was someone else there. Someone who didn't want her leaving those woods alive. The interview ended with no confession, no closure. Outside, Belle lit a cigarette he wouldn't smoke and watched the river slide past. Rivas joined him. He's hiding something. Question is it his own crime or someone else's? Belle exhaled slowly. Either way, we're going to find out. Back at the station, The analysts pulled Evan's cell records from the summer of 2012. One number appeared repeatedly in the weeks before Hannah vanished. Unregistered, prepaid, and pinging off towers near the forest's north entrance. The last call occurred the night of the storm. At 2:17 a.m., 2 minutes after Hannah's final recorded words, that detail kept Belle awake. If Evan's account was true, if a third person had been following them, then that call might have been the moment the two men crossed paths. If it wasn't true, then Evan had been making contact with someone in the middle of whatever happened in that clearing. Either way, it was leverage. They returned to Idaho unannounced. Evan opened the door slower this time, wearing the wariness of someone who'd been thinking too much about their last conversation. Belle didn't waste time. "That number you kept calling, who was it?" Evan's jaw flexed. "Doesn't matter, he's dead. Name, Tom Raker. He knew the area, said he'd guide us for a cut of some money Hannah had." The name meant nothing to Belle in the moment, but Rivas shot him a glance that said otherwise. Back in the car, Rivas explained. "Raker's an ex-logger, arrested in '09 for assault. Lived off the grid near the park boundary. Disappeared same year Hannah did." Belle tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "If Raker's our hooded man, we've got a whole new problem." The next steps became clear. Track Raker's last known camp. See if anything tied him to Hannah or Evan in those missing hours. But the urgency had changed. What was once about proving Evan's guilt was now about proving who else might have been there, and whether they'd been the one to silence Hannah. As Belle drove back toward the station, the river winding beside them like a silver ribbon, he felt the case shift under his hands. Evan might be a liar. He might even be a killer, but for the first time, Belle wasn't sure he'd been alone. The maps Evan drew were crude, but they gave Belle and Rivas a starting point. 2 X's marked where. He claimed to have last seen Hannah, one at the cliff's edge, the other deeper into the woods near a stream. Both, he insisted, were close enough to hear the river. It took 3 days for the search teams to hack through that part of the forest. The air there felt different, cooler, heavier, and the canopy closed so tightly that noon looked like twilight. The ground sloped into a narrow ravine, its sides damp with moss. It was one of the volunteers who called out. The remains lay half hidden beneath ferns, the bones curled inward as if she'd been bracing herself. The skull was fractured along one side, a hairline crack that widened toward the temple. Beside her, a rusted metal tripod lay snapped clean in two, one leg bent at a sharp angle. Belle crouched, his gloved hand brushing mud from the tripod's hinge. It matched the make and model of the one from Hannah's camcorder, the same one missing since 2012. "Get the forensic team," he said quietly. By the time they'd photographed and measured the scene, the air smelled faintly metallic. Not from fresh blood, but from the memory of it. The ground around the remains was unstable, a mix of silt and decomposed leaves, which explained why she hadn't been found sooner, but it was the footprints that froze Belle. 2 distinct sets, one matched Evan's boots, confirmed by the tread pattern in old photos from the footage. The other was larger, the sole worn smooth like the kind used in work boots. The tracks overlapped in places, sometimes within inches of each other, then split in opposite directions. "Raker," Rivas murmured. Belle didn't answer. The coroner's report arrived a week later. The skeletal remains were confirmed as Hannah's through dental records. Cause of death? Blunt force trauma to the skull? Consistent with either a fall or being struck with a heavy object. The broken tripod could have been that object. When Belle brought the evidence to the district attorney, the charge was swift, manslaughter. Evan Cross was arrested at his cabin, led away in cuffs while locals stood at the edge of the road whispering his name. In the interview room, Evan didn't fight. He didn't cry. He didn't even ask for a lawyer right away. "I told you," he said. "I wasn't alone out there." Belle stared at him. "If Raker was with you, why did you leave her?" Evan's eyes narrowed. "Because I thought she was already gone. And if I stayed, I'd be next." The trial would take months to prepare, but Belle knew the public wouldn't wait that long for answers. Hannah's case had haunted the town for 7 years. Now they had a body, a suspect, and a timeline that on paper made sense, but the paper left too much out. It didn't explain why the second set of footprints veered toward the ridge above the ravine. It didn't explain the deep gouge in the soil near the tripod, as though someone had tried to wedge it into the ground before it broke. It didn't explain the faint smell of campfire smoke that had lingered near the scene. Despite no signs of a fire pit, Hannah's mother, Margaret, insisted on visiting the site once it had been cleared. Belle tried to dissuade her. The ravine was steep, the air damp and cold, but she wouldn't be moved. "I need to see where she was," she said. They went in the late afternoon. Sunlight dappled through the leaves, painting the ground in fractured gold. Margaret stood at the edge of the ravine, her hands folded tight in front of her. She didn't speak for a long time. When she finally did, her voice was almost a whisper. She was so afraid of the dark when she was little. Always thought something was in the trees, watching. I'd tell her it was just the wind. Belle said, "Nothing." Margaret looked up at the canopy, the shadows shifting with the breeze. What if she was right? The official closing of the scene didn't close the case. Belle filed his report, but in the final section, the one reserved for investigators' notes, he wrote, "Presence of second individual in area is probable. Identity unknown. Recommend ongoing surveillance of northern forest perimeter." The forest, he thought, didn't care about the charges or the headlines. It kept what it wanted. 2 weeks later, a park ranger patrolling near the north entrance found something caught in the fork of a dead tree, a scrap of fabric, sun-bleached but still patterned faintly with red and black. Forensics confirmed it. It was from a flannel shirt, size XL. The size didn't match anything in Hannah's belongings. It did match the description of the shirt Tom Raker had been wearing in a police bulletin from 2009. Bell stood in the evidence room, the fabric sealed in a clear plastic bag. He thought about the footprints in the ravine, the way they had split apart. One set had led away from Hannah, up toward higher ground. If Raker had survived the night in the storm, he could have stayed hidden in the forest for years, just as Evan had hidden in plain sight. The day wouldn't delay the trial over. We have the body, we have the weapon. We have the man who admits he was there, she told him. The rest is speculation. But speculation was what cases like this were built on, at least until something broke them open. The day before Evan's preliminary hearing, Bell drove out to the forest alone. He parked where the old logging road ended and followed the game trail to the ravine. The leaves had already started to turn, the first hints of autumn cutting through the summer green. He crouched near the place where the footprints had diverged, tracing one with the tip of his pen. Beyond it, the ridge climbed toward the north, disappearing into shadows. The forest was quiet, no wind, no birdsong. Just the faint creak of branches overhead. Bell straightened and looked back toward the ravine. The space felt both emptier and heavier now that Hannah's remains were gone, as if the trees themselves had shifted to fill the absence. When the case finally reached court, the gallery was packed. Margaret sat in the front row, hands clasped tight. She didn't look at Evan as they brought him in. The prosecution laid out their evidence, the recovered remains, the tripod, the footage, Evan's inconsistent statements. The defense argued that the injuries could have been accidental, that the storm and terrain made rescue impossible, and that someone else, possibly the hooded man, had been present. The jury would decide, but outside that courtroom, in the spaces between official reports and sworn testimony, the questions lingered. Who had left those other prints? What had they been doing so close to Hannah's final moments? And why had they never come forward? Margaret visited the forest once more after the verdict. Bell went with her, though this time he stayed back as she walked ahead. She stopped at the edge of the ravine, eyes scanning the tree line. Somewhere beyond that wall of green, the second set of prints had vanished. She whispered something Bell couldn't hear. Then she turned and walked back toward him, her face unreadable as they left. The shadows lengthened between the trunks, and the wind moved through the branches in a low, restless sigh. The forest, Bell thought, still had more to tell, and it wasn't finished.